Queen Valora stood high above her kingdom in the control room of her warship, her golden eyes scanning the galaxy. She was a powerful ruler, commanding legions of elite soldiers. Her empire was vast, stretching across countless planets, and she had seen all sorts of warriors. None, however, were more foolish than the humans. She had heard the rumors. They said that human warriors were joining the Galactic Defense Forces, but Queen Valora found it hard to believe. The humans in her eyes were weak and unpolished. Technology was primitive, their soldiers inexperienced. What could they possibly offer that her empire's armies couldn't? A messenger arrived at the control room, bowing before her. "Your Majesty, the humans are requesting to join the front lines of our next battle. They wish to fight alongside your finest soldiers." Valora chuckled to herself. No, she had never seen a more ridiculous idea. Humans on the front lines. She muttered, "What a joke. What could they possibly do against a real enemy?" She waved her hand dismissively, ordering the messenger to bring a human soldier before her. Moments later, Daniel Armstrong entered the room. He was tall, but his frame was nothing like the towering warriors of Valora's empire. His armor was simple, lacking the elegance of the alien designs she was used to seeing. His eyes were determined, but there was a certain nervousness in his stance, as though he wasn't sure if he was standing in the right place, "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I am Daniel Armstrong, a human warrior. I request permission to fight beside your soldiers." Valora looked him up and down, a smirk forming on her face. She couldn't help but laugh. "Human warrior," she mocked. "You think you can? Fight alongside my elite soldiers. You're nothing more than a distraction. Your kind is weak. You're nothing but fragile beings in a galaxy filled with strength." Daniel didn't flinch. "I may not have your strength, Your Majesty, but I have something that no alien can match." His voice was firm. The will to fight, to protect, and to never give up no matter the odds. Queen Valora raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by his boldness. "And what makes you think that your will to fight can stand against the forces of the galaxy? I have conquered entire systems, crushed armies in seconds. What makes you believe that your kind will be any different?" Daniel stood tall. "I don't know if we're different, but I know this. Humans fight for each other. When one of us falls, we don't leave them behind. We rise together." Valora laughed again, but this time it was a laugh tinged with doubt. She had never heard such words from any other species. Humans may have had heart, but she believed that was all they had. Heart would never win a battle. Only strength and power mattered in war. "You'll learn soon enough," Valora said, her voice cold. "You will see just how outmatched you are in battle. You are no match for the power of my empire." Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he simply nodded, his face set with determination. He had come to fight, and he wasn't about to back down. No matter how much the Queen laughed at him, the battle was set to take place on the barren world of Zenithar. Valara's elite soldiers would be leading the charge, but humans were to follow as requested. The alien queen didn't care much about the humans' involvement. She knew they wouldn't last long, but she wanted to see if Daniel Armstrong could live up to his words. She wanted to see him fail. The battlefield stretched out before Queen Valara's eyes. The dry, rocky terrain of Zenithar was the perfect setting for the galactic forces to prove their might. She stood high in her command ship, observing the ground below through a giant viewing screen. The battlefield was filled with the chaos of war, the ground shaking with explosions, and the air thick with smoke.
Ow!
Her soldiers were ready to face the enemy forces, a brutal alien race known as the Saric. Their monstrous size and terrifying weapons made them a deadly opponent. Valara's troops, highly trained and battle-hardened, moved with precision. Their coordinated strikes were meant to overwhelm the Saric, and she had no doubt that they would succeed. But what made her curious were the humans. The humans, led by Daniel Armstrong, had been given a small section of the battlefield. It was a seemingly insignificant role, something Valora believed would quickly prove their weakness. After all, humans were too fragile to endure the kind of battle she commanded. The idea that they could fight alongside her elite soldiers seemed laughable. As the first wave of Sarek forces charged, Valara's soldiers engaged without hesitation, their advanced weapons cutting down their enemies with deadly accuracy. But it was clear that the Sarek were not easily defeated. They fought with relentless fury, their numbers overwhelming the alien defenders. Valora watched, confident that her forces would soon gain the upper hand. But then, something caught her eye. The human warriors, including Daniel, had not faltered. In fact, they were already moving forward, not waiting for orders, but charging headfirst into the fray. She saw Daniel's group of soldiers engage the Sarek with simple, yet effective tactics. They fought with nothing but sheer willpower. Their weapons aimed not for precision, but for survival. "Foolish humans," Valora muttered under her breath, but her voice faltered as she watched Daniel take down a Sarek warrior twice his size. The human didn't pause, kept moving, taking down another one, and then another. His team followed suit, working together like a well-oiled machine, covering each other's backs in ways that surprised Valor. She had expected them to crumble, to run in fear or be easily destroyed. But instead, they were pushing forward, charging into the heart of the battle. It was something she had never seen before, level of aggression, of raw survival instinct, that seemed to defy all logic. Valara's eyes narrowed as she watched. The battle was turning in the humans' favor, not because of their superior weapons or technology, but because they refused to quit. Where her soldiers would hesitate, the humans pushed forward. Where her elite warriors would look for the safest route, the humans went straight into danger, relying on nothing but their wits and their determination. Daniel was in the thick of it. He fought fiercely, never pausing for breath. Every swing of his sword, every shot from his rifle, was calculated with one thing in mind: the survival of his team. He didn't hesitate, even when a Sarek warrior tried to surround him. With a swift motion, Daniel threw a grenade into the group and took them down in a single blow. His soldiers, inspired by his bravery, followed suit, taking down enemies. With unrelenting force, Valora watched this display in disbelief. How could they fight like this? Humans, with their primitive technology and supposed weakness, were fighting as though their lives depended on it because they did. She had never seen anything like it. These humans were not the weaklings she had dismissed earlier, as they were warriors in their own right. She glanced over at her own elite soldiers, who had begun to show signs of strain. The Sarek were a fierce enemy, and while Valara's troops were well trained, they had not expected the fight to last so long. The humans, however, seemed to be thriving in the chaos. They adapted, they learned, and most importantly, they never backed down. The Sarek were losing ground. Their numbers began to thin as human soldiers pushed them back, killing them in droves. Queen Valora, once sure of her superiority, felt a strange feeling bubbling inside her, a mix of fear and awe. She had underestimated the humans. As the battle raged on, Valora's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of more explosions. The human warriors had managed to breach the Sarek's defensive lines. She saw Daniel at the front, leading his soldiers through a hail of gunfire, determined to push through and defeat the enemy. The humans' relentless nature was working in their favor. With every Sarek that fell, the human warriors became more determined, more unstoppable. Valora could no longer deny it. The humans were not weak. They were not fragile. They were powerful in ways she had never understood. And their power lay in their spirit, their refusal to give up no matter the cost. Battle was far from over, but Valara's view of the humans was beginning to change. She had thought them unworthy of fighting alongside her elite soldiers. Now she wasn't so sure. They were proving themselves to be something entirely different. Something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. Daniel's team had pushed the Sarek forces back. The enemy was retreating, but they were not finished yet. There was still much to be done, but for the first time, Valora was forced to admit that the humans had proven themselves on the battlefield. They had not only survived, they had thrived. Her laughter from earlier seemed like a distant memory. The human warriors had shown her that strength came in many forms. She watched Daniel Armstrong, his face covered in dirt and blood, standing, tall with his comrades. They had fought for each other. And in that moment, Valora realized that humans could fight beside her empire, because they were stronger in number, but because they had something she had never expected. The battle had been raging for hours, but it felt like no time at all to Queen Valora. Her warship hovered high above the field, and she watched the chaos unfold through her large viewing screen. The Sarek forces, though powerful, were clearly losing ground to the relentless assault of the human warriors. It was a sight Valora had not expected. Her elite soldiers had fought bravely, but the humans were outshining them. They were everywhere, fighting with an energy that was almost impossible. To ignore Daniel Armstrong, the human soldier she had once laughed at, was leading the charge. Valora had never seen anything like it. The humans didn't hesitate. They didn't wait for the perfect moment. They just went straight into battle, taking on the enemy with everything they had. And it was working. She had initially thought of the humans as nothing more than a distraction, an afterthought to be used in the battle. But now she was forced to acknowledge that their actions had been anything but a joke. The humans had thrown themselves into the fight with an intensity that no alien force could have matched. Their actions were unpredictable and fearless, and this was something Valora had never seen before. As the battle continued, Valora found herself leaning forward, unable to tear her eyes away from the screen. Daniel and his team were now cutting through the Sarek forces with deadly precision. The Sarek, once so confident in their strength, were beginning to retreat. It was no longer just the human warriors who were pushing forward. It was the entire battlefield. The humans had become a force of nature, an unstoppable tide that was turning the tide of battle. Valora's heart pounded as she watched Daniel take down yet another Sarek warrior, his movements quick and precise. She had seen hundreds of soldiers fight, but none fought with such passion, such raw determination. Every strike Daniel made seemed to be more powerful than the last, as if the human strength grew with each challenge they faced. A loud explosion rattled the air, shaking the ground beneath her feet. Valora watched as Daniel's squad blew a hole in the enemy's defenses. The humans didn't even pause to celebrate. They moved straight into the opening, not caring about the danger only, focused on winning. The Sarek, who had once seemed invincible, were now the ones running. They had underestimated the human warriors. Now they were paying the price. Queen Valora stood frozen, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had never expected this. She had thought the humans would fail, and she had planned to watch them crumble. But they weren't crumbling. They were growing stronger. They were taking charge of the battlefield in a way that no one had predicted. It was almost as if their very will to survive gave them strength that surpassed any technology or weaponry. The longer Valora watched, the more she realized something she had refused to consider. The humans weren't like other species. Were unpredictable, yes. They didn't have the most advanced technology or the best trained soldiers, but they had something that Valora's elite warriors lacked: heart. The humans fought not because they had to, but because they believed. In what they were doing, they were fighting for each other, for the survival of their people, and for a future they believed in. They fought because they had no other choice. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. She had never believed that something as intangible as willpower could win a battle. But now, it seemed like the very thing that was making the humans so dangerous. They didn't stop. They didn't give up. Every moment they were in battle, they were getting stronger. They adapted to every new challenge, every new threat. While her own soldiers grew tired, the humans fought with renewed energy, as if the fight itself gave them life. Valora clenched her fists, her anger rising. She had made a mistake. She had underestimated them. Now she was paying the price. The human warriors were proving that they had earned their place among the stars. As the final wave of Sarek forces began to retreat, Daniel's team continued to push forward. They fought with one goal in mind: victory. Gola could see it in their eyes. The fight wasn't over for them. It wasn't just about survival. It was about proving themselves. It's about showing the galaxy that the human spirit was something to be reckoned with. Valora's chest tightened as she realized something. Else, the humans were more than just warriors. They were a force that could change the galaxy. The way they fought, the way they refused to accept defeat, it was a power that no one could ignore. Then now, As she watched them emerge victorious from the battle, she knew that things would never be the same. For the first time, Valora felt a sense of respect for the humans. It was something she had never imagined. She had thought they were weak, but now she saw the truth. They were not weak at all, or something entirely different. And that difference was what made them so dangerous as the Sarek forces began. To flee, Valora looked at the humans with new eyes. She had once laughed at them, dismissed them as nothing more than a curiosity. But now she realized that the humans were not to be underestimated. They had earned her respect, and that was something no one else had ever done. The battle was over, but Valora knew that the war had only just begun. The humans had proven themselves today, and they would continue to prove themselves in the future. And she, Queen Valora, would be forced to reckon with them. The battle was not yet over. Queen Valora stood in her command center, her eyes glued to the screen as the last waves of the Sarek forces retreated. She couldn't believe it. The humans had fought with an intensity she had never expected.
Ow.
The once feared Sarek were fleeing, their soldiers abandoning their posts, their morale shattered. The Sarek had not just been defeated, they had been broken. Valora's soldiers, still fighting in the heart of the battlefield, began to push forward, cleaning up the remnants of the Sarek army. The humans, however, were not content to rest. They kept moving, charging into the remaining Sarek positions, securing every inch of ground. Daniel Armstrong, leading the charge, showed no sign of stopping. His team followed closely behind. Clearing enemy forces with ruthless precision, Valora watched as Daniel and his soldiers used every tool at their disposal. Simple grenades, small blasters, and even improvised traps. The humans weren't using advanced weapons. They were using whatever they could find, and yet they were winning. Suddenly, an alarm sounded on Valora's ship. A new threat had appeared. Incoming enemy warship. The officer shouted, "It's the Sarek's last Weapon A battlecruiser. It's headed straight for the battlefield." Eyes narrowed. This was what she had been waiting for. The Sarek's final card. The battlecruiser was their last hope. With its heavy armor and powerful weapons, it could destroy everything in its path. But Valora knew something the Sarek didn't. Her soldiers, though tired, had the advantage in numbers. And the humans, she could feel it would be more than ready for this final test. "Prepare for battle," Valora ordered, her voice cold and calculated. "Send a message to the human commander. Tell him to fall back." The human warriors, however, had no intention of retreating. Daniel's voice came through over the communication channel. "We're not falling back," he said, his voice steady, but filled with determination. "We're taking that cruiser down." Valora felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite identify or respect. Maybe fear. She had underestimated them before. The humans had earned her attention, and now they were earning her awe. But this was a different challenge. The cruiser would be nearly impossible to destroy. She doubted even her own elite soldiers could manage it, but Daniel was unshaken. "We've got this," he said confidently, cutting the communication short. Valora watched in silence as the humans prepared for the fight. Daniel's team, with no advanced ships or powerful artillery, took their positions. They worked together as a team, communicating through gestures and signals. Knowing that their survival depended on their cooperation, Valora's elite soldiers had fallen back to regroup. And now the humans were taking the lead. They ran toward the incoming cruiser with a fierce determination, their simple weapons ready. A team of human engineers had already set up a makeshift device designed to disable the cruiser's shields. It was risky, dangerous, and untested, but the humans had no choice but to try. Daniel, with his team following closely behind, reached the position where the device was placed. A Sarek fighter ship flew overhead, but Daniel and his team managed to avoid detection, keeping their heads low as they crept closer to the cruiser. With every second that passed, the battle seemed to grow more intense. The cruiser's guns began to fire, sending blasts across the field, but the humans remained focused. They didn't hesitate. They didn't run. They kept moving. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Daniel and his team reached the cruiser's shield generator. The enemy didn't expect them to get this far. In fact, the Sarek seemed to think they were already finished. But the humans had other plans. The device was activated, sending an electromagnetic pulse toward the shield. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the shield flickered. It began to weaken. "Now," Daniel shouted. His team rushed forward, placing explosive charges on the shield generator. They worked as one, covering each other's backs as they set the charges. The Sarek cruiser began to fire its main weapons, but it was too late. The shield dropped just as the charges detonated. A massive explosion rocked the cruiser, sending it spiraling out of control. Valora watched as the giant warship crumpled under the force of the explosion. The humans had done it. They had disabled the Sarek's most powerful weapon, and it was in that moment that Valora realized something else. The humans were not just fighters, they were survivors. They could face the impossible and still come out on top. They were not to be underestimated. As the dust settled and the Sarek cruiser crashed to the ground, Daniel's team stood victorious. They had done the impossible, and they had done it with nothing more than courage, teamwork, and sheer willpower. For the first time since the battle had begun, Valora felt a twinge of admiration for the humans. They had faced death, and they had come out victorious. She had never seen anything like it. On the battlefield, Daniel and his team walked away, covered in dirt and blood. But with their heads held high, they had won. Not because they had the best weapons or the most advanced technology, but because they had something else, something that no one else in the galaxy seemed to have. They had heart, and Valora couldn't ignore it any longer. The battle had ended, but the war was far from over. Queen Valora stood in her command center, her eyes fixed on the screen, watching the last of the Sarek forces retreat. Her heart pounded, but not with the satisfaction of victory. This time something was different. She had witnessed something she could not ignore. The humans had done the impossible. They had taken down the Sarek's battlecruiser, the ship that was supposed to be their final weapon, with nothing but their courage and their simple tools. They had accomplished what Valora's elite soldiers could not. It was a feat that demanded recognition. She had dismissed them as weak, fragile creatures, but the humans had proven her wrong at every turn. They fought not for glory, not for the thrill of battle, but for something deeper. For each other. For their people. For survival. Valora stood still, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of everything she had just witnessed. She had spent her life conquering worlds, destroying enemies, and maintaining control. She had ruled with power and fear, and she had never once considered that there was more to strength than brute force. But the humans had shown her a different kind of strength, strength that came from within, from the heart, from the will. To keep fighting no matter what, she had seen countless warriors in her life, some with more power than any human could ever dream of. But none had fought with the same fire as the humans. None had pushed themselves to the brink of death only to rise and fight again. None had ever earned her respect the way the humans had. It was only now, standing there in the quiet of her command center, that Valora realized the truth. The humans were not just a race to be conquered. They were a force to be reckoned with. And if she was going to lead her empire to victory, she would need them by her side. The thought was both a shock and a revelation. For all her strength, Valora knew that her empire could not survive in isolation. The galaxy was changing, and the humans were part of that change. They had proven themselves on the battlefield, and now they had earned their place in the galaxy. "Majesty," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was the officer who had been monitoring the communications. Valora turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "What is it, human commander?" "Daniel Armstrong is requesting a meeting," the officer reported. "He wishes to speak with you." Valora paused for a moment. She had seen the determination in Daniel's eyes during the battle. She had never expected him to seek her out after everything that had happened. She had been ready to dismiss the humans, to send them back to their own territory. But now, things were different. "Allow him in," Valora said finally, her voice calm, but with a hint of something else, something she couldn't name. Moments later, Daniel Armstrong stepped into the room, his face tired but proud. His uniform was stained with blood and dirt. But there was no mistaking the resolve in his eyes. He was a warrior, and he had earned his place among the stars. "Your Majesty," Daniel said, bowing his head slightly. "Thank you for allowing me to speak with you." Valora studied him for a moment, her gaze unwavering. "You have earned the right to be heard, Daniel Armstrong," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I have seen your warriors in battle. You have proven yourselves more than capable. Your people have fought with a strength I've never seen before." Daniel nodded, though he seemed humble, as though he didn't fully understand the weight of her words. "We fight because we have no other choice," he replied. "We fight for our families, for our people. It's not about power or glory, about survival." Valera's eyes softened, though she quickly hid the feeling. "And that is why you are dangerous. It's because you fight not for yourselves, but for others. That is something even my soldiers cannot understand." At her, his expression serious. "We may not have the same power as your soldiers, but we have something else. Something that you can't defeat with strength alone." Valora was silent for a moment, thinking over his words. She had never considered the humans in this way. To her, strength had always meant power, military might, advanced technology, unyielding armies. But Daniel was right. The humans fought for each other. And that was a power that Valora had never fully understood. "I never thought I would say this," Valora said, her voice steady, but with a hint of respect. "But you have proven yourselves. You have earned my respect, and that is not something I give easily." Daniel didn't smile, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He knew what it meant to earn respect from someone like Queen Valora. "I came here to offer something," Daniel said, stepping forward. "The humans are not asking for a place in your empire. We are not asking for your favor. What we are offering is an alliance. A chance to fight together, side by side. To face the challenges ahead as equals." Valora looked at him, her mind racing. An alliance with humans? She had never considered it before, but now it seemed like the only option. The humans were strong, not because of their weapons or technology, but because of their will, their hearts. They had something her empire could use. "I will consider your offer," Valora said, her voice calm but filled with the weight of a decision that could change the course of the galaxy. "And I will send word of my decision soon." Daniel nodded, his face serious but hopeful. "Thank you, Your Majesty." As he left the room, Valora stood still, her thoughts swirling. She had always thought of herself as the strongest, the most powerful being in the galaxy. But now she realized that power was not enough. She needed the humans. And together, they could change everything. The days that followed the battle were filled with tension. The Sauric forces had been driven back, but the war was far from over. Queen Valora stood on the bridge of her warship, staring out at the vastness of space. She was alone, her thoughts racing. The decision she had to make weighed heavily on her mind. The humans, under Daniel Armstrong's leadership, had proven themselves in ways she had never imagined. She had watched them fight with everything they had. Their strength was not in their weapons, but in their resolve, their unity, and their will to survive. The battle had shown her something she could no longer ignore. The humans were not just warriors. They were a force to be reckoned with. The message Daniel had sent, offering an alliance, had left her conflicted. She had never considered humans as equals, let alone partners. Her empire had always relied on its own power, its own resources, and its own strength. But now she saw that this approach might not be enough. If the galaxy was to survive, if they were to face the greater threats that loomed on the horizon, she needed more than just power. She needed the humans. Valara's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. She turned to see her trusted officer, who had been monitoring the communications, looked uneasy, his eyes darting between her and the datapad in. "His hands, Your Majesty. The humans are requesting another meeting," the officer said, his voice respectful but filled with uncertainty. "Commander Armstrong insists on speaking with you again." Valora nodded. She had known this moment would come. Daniel had earned his place, and now it was time to make a choice. She motioned for the officer to proceed. "Send him in." Moments later, Daniel Armstrong entered the room, his presence calm but determined. He still wore his battle-worn uniform, the marks of the fight still visible on his face. But there was a new sense of confidence in his step. He was no longer the uncertain human who had first stood before her. He was a leader, a warrior who had earned his place among the stars. "Your Majesty," Daniel said, bowing his head in a gesture of respect. "I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak with you again." Valora regarded him for a moment, her mind sharp. "The battle is over, Commander," she said, her voice steady. "But the war is not. The Sarek may have retreated, but there are greater dangers ahead. I have seen your warriors fight, and I have seen your resolve. I have come to realize that you and your people have something my empire needs." Daniel listened closely, his expression serious. He had come to offer his people's alliance, but he could tell from the Queen's tone that something had changed in her. She was no longer dismissing the humans. She was considering them. "You speak of dangers, Your Majesty," Daniel said, stepping forward. "And you're right. The galaxy is facing threats from all sides. The Sarek are not the only enemy. We need to fight together if we're going to survive." Valora nodded, her eyes never leaving him. "I agree. But I cannot lead my people into a partnership without knowing that you understand the responsibility that comes with it. Your warriors are strong, but they are also unpredictable. I've seen how you fight. You take risks, sometimes too many. That kind of behavior could cost us everything in the long run." Daniel met her gaze without hesitation. "We take risks because we have to. We don't have the luxury of being cautious. When you're fighting for your survival, you take every opportunity, no matter how dangerous. We don't run from a fight, and we don't leave our people behind." Valora studied him, her mind turning. She had never heard such words from any other leader. It wasn't the typical response she had heard from the leaders of other races. There was no arrogance, no claim of superiority. There was only a fierce determination to protect those who mattered, and it was clear that this was something the humans had in abundance. "I've seen what your people are capable of," Valora said finally. "And I've come to understand that you are not to be underestimated. Your bravery, your willingness to sacrifice for one another, this is something we need in our fight. But we must be clear. An alliance is not without its costs. You and your people will not only fight alongside my empire, you will become a part of it. Your leaders will join my council. Your people will help shape the future of this galaxy." Daniel nodded. He had expected this. Alliance wasn't just about fighting side by side. It was about trust, about becoming part of something larger than themselves. "We're ready," he said. "We've already seen what happens when we fight together. Now we want to build something lasting." Valora looked at him, her expression unreadable. But inside, she knew that this was the moment. She had made her decision. The galaxy was changing, and it was time for her to embrace that change. "Then it's settled," Valora said, her voice firm. "The humans will stand with us. Together, we will face whatever challenges come our way." Daniel's face softened, and for the first time, Valora saw a flicker of pride in his eyes. He had done it. He had earned the respect of the most powerful ruler in the galaxy. But more than that, he had brought his people into the fold of something much greater than they had ever imagined. "The alliance is formed," Daniel said, "and together we will win." Valora stepped forward, extending her hand toward him. It was a gesture of unity, of partnership, new beginning. As their hands met in agreement, the weight of the moment settled over them both. It forged a bond that would change the galaxy, a bond born of mutual respect, shared struggle, and the will to fight for a future that was worth protecting.